During the Second World War, after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States government bolstered its transportation networks in the North by investing millions of dollars in three major projects. The first was building a series of small landing strips in the Yukon to support air transport. The second was the construction of the Alaska Highway to move goods overland. The third, and lesser known, was the Canol Pipeline. The pipeline was built from Norman Wells, Northwest Territories to Whitehorse, Yukon, to meet the energy needs of Alaska with a northern source of Canadian crude. Construction began in 1942 and was completed in 1944. However, the pipeline was used for less than 14 months. Work on the Canol Pipeline was not for the faint of heart. At least 20,000 people worked on the project in some of the world's harshest conditions. Over 70 years later, a group of 5 women decided to try and ride it. We were the first all-female crew to attempt to traverse the trail left behind by the forgotten pipeline. The adventure began in Whitehorse on July 17th, 2017. We all flew in and met July 17th and 18th in Whitehorse. We went crazy packing and reorganizing food and getting our bikes all set up and reconstructed after flying them in. And then my dad actually helped us out by renting a vehicle and a trailer, and he's the one who drove us from Whitehorse to Ross River along the South Canol Road. So we packed up our bags super quick, pouring rain, hopped on this little cable ferry, got the tow across, and then all of a sudden we were riding. That was it. Next point of contact was going to be Norman Wells.
When I dream like really, really big. Like, why go on a bike tour when you can go on a bike tour in the Yukon Territories on a road that was abandoned 70 years ago, right?
The Canol is just quite an unbelievable story. So I think this pairing of this sort of kind of digging up this historical piece as we actually ride along the Canol is I really like to kind of pair that, you know, have a really kind of larger story that pairs with my athletic endeavors too. So.
I'm really just fascinated with stories of human endeavors in the Canadian North and how the weather and the conditions and the remoteness really kick people's asses.
One of my favorite quotes is, "Everything that you want is on the other side of fear." So this trip really piqued my interest because of that.
I'm a big fan of Type 2 fun, which is primarily what motivated this trip. But I think that the potential for personal growth and becoming a stronger person is another big part of it. And I'm psyched to be sharing that with these ladies. So, day 2, here we go. First 230 kilometers of the whole trip were on really well-maintained Forest Service roads. Just super cruisy riding. Lots of uphill, so like not easy, but fully riding.
I have never seen anything like this. It's also really hard riding, which makes me think that when they were like choosing this, they must have just been slogging.
I guess on day 3, we were just about to cross the South McMillan River and begin to climb the McMillan Pass towards the Northwest Territories and the Yukon border, where we knew that the road conditions were going to deteriorate. We were just summiting a big hill, and we crested it and started riding down, and I took a couple pumps with my pedals, and I was like, well, that's weird, I'm not flying, why am I not generating any power with my wheels? So we got to the bottom, and I'm still just totally spinning out, and my my crank is no longer engaging. I'm like, I don't know very much about bikes, but I'm pretty sure this is bad. So I called Hannah, who is our mechanic.
What's happening, Hannah?
She was awesome the whole time. And she looked at it and was immediately like, yeah, this is really not good. We prepared for so many mechanical failures. We did not prepare for this one. So you could ride bikes your whole life and never see this. So inevitably, what the diagnosis was that my freewheel, my hub had kind of failed, and I had completely lost the ability to generate forward torque with my bike. I got out some cordelette and just started tying my cogs to my spokes, which actually worked out really nice. Yeah. And yep. Rode out the rest of the day.
Are we ready to pick up our aunt?
Across the border. By this time, the terrain was sort of starting to get absolutely gorgeous. Nearing the end of the day, we ran into some hunting guides who were on their way out from a hunting camp that was further in. And it was also cool to run into these guys because it meant that, oh, we might have some luck here getting a wheel shipped in. And shortly thereafter, Gabby took a huge bail on one of our descents. But that was enough for that day, and we pulled over and camped there and kind of collected our thoughts. We were still about 2 days away from hunting camp, but we figured, you know, if we just kind of keep going at this pace, we were going to be fine. We still had yet to hit mile 222. We had also had our rafts cached further up ahead. So we knew we had a couple more hard days before we were going to get any mechanical repairs done, but we were feeling good. And the next day, put in a big long day, went to mile 222. This is, by now we're in the Northwest Territories, and for sure road conditions had declined. We're doing lots of like pond and puddle crossings, carrying our bikes, no more bridges, no more bridges. So we had coffee and tea with the guides at mile 222, which was ever so exciting, nice and warm. And then rode up and away from there on some really interesting terrain and a big long pass that we covered that day. And that day just kept getting longer and longer and longer because our goal was the Caribou, like to get across Caribou Pass, which seemed to be the pass that just would never end. And it was getting late in the day, and we knew there was a cabin where our rafts were stored, and that was our goal, to get through the pass, get to this cabin, pick up our rafts, camp there for the night. But my derailleur started to fail, so Hannah decided we'll take that off because we'll preserve it for when we get the new wheel, and we'll just take it off, ride proper fixie, so no options to shift gears. And so we tried that, but in quick succession broke 3 chains, so ended up on foot because of that. And it's now like 10:30 at night, still daylight fortunately, but now we're all on foot. And we're tired, and we come around a corner and there's 2 grizzly cubs standing there. One of them starts to come towards us like, hey, what's up? And we're like, okay, that's cool, but where's mom? And so we get out a bear banger and we fire off a bear banger. They're not so scared, and it took a while for them to turn around and leave. Eventually the cabin showed up and we had at least a comfortable night, and we were able to do some minor repairs in the morning and head off toward Garden Lake, which is where we were expecting the new bike wheel to be the next day. Again, like, terrain is just these beautiful valley systems, and you would begin your day heading down a valley system, and then you'd get to the head wall of it and you'd look back and be like, wow, we just did that. And you'd get to take right or left, and then you'd start it all over again. You'd look down this next system and you'd cover the whole distance. And it was really profound how much distance we were covering in a day. And I really, I've done lots of hiking and mountain travel, but for the first time felt like, wow, we're really moving with these mountains. The next day toward Garden Lake, it was only like a 40-kilometer day. but with my sort of limp-along bike, it took a lot longer. We had a number of river crossings that day, which were super great. Nothing too scary. We didn't yet have to get the rafts out, but we were like thigh deep in water a number of times. And then we actually came upon a few really, really cool old campsites as well, where there was lots of old buildings that were just barely standing and lots of kind of old relic material and vehicles and things. So again, really getting the feeling of what was once here and what had just been so abruptly left. The final push onto Godlin was really trying, but beautiful weather. We were still in pretty good spirits, and we arrived there at 11:30 at night, again on foot because my chain broke for the last time. And I cried. And Hannah gave me a tow until we finally saw the cabins. Then we got in there, and Glenda greeted us with open arms and offered us a big wall tent to stay in, and it just happened to be Hannah's 30th birthday, and we had a great night. But within seconds of arriving and getting all of our stuff in, the skies broke open. So we were like, okay, whatever, like systems move through the mountains pretty quick. We're not worried. Our intention was still wait out the next day, get the wheels go. But that storm settled in and stayed with us for 4 days. This was probably the toughest part of the trip, because what we decided the next day was that 3 of the girls, Rohanna, Gabi, and Sinead, would carry on as planned to try and kind of keep us on track, while Hannah and I would wait in camp for that wheel to arrive, thinking it was really just, any minute, any hour. We were still thinking we'd be able to maybe just jump on our bikes and catch up with them. But in one day turned into another day, and we were stuck knowing our friends were out there in the pouring rain, via inReach messages, knowing that they were struggling, knowing that they were super, super cold and wet and had been having a really hard time. And I think even though the trip is really physical, laying in the tent with Hannah, just without the ability to contribute or to do anything, that was probably the hardest part. I was fully expecting that when that plane arrived, I was just going to have to get on it and go. A plane arrived at 6 o'clock in the night with a group of hunters who had been patiently waiting to be brought in with my wheel. And so Hannah and I had brought the old wheel down to the plane, and sure enough, the disc is the wrong size. And I was like crying, and I had my bag packed, and I was ready to get on the plane. But one of the guys who got off the plane happened to be a mountain biker, and he said, well, what if you just shim it away from the frame? And we were like, okay, that's good enough, let's try it. Sure enough, within about 15 minutes, we had a working bike. A helicopter pilot was gonna shuttle us up to where the girls were at the base of Trout Creek. And that's what happened. So we had one more night in camp. We jumped in the helicopter, slung the bikes underneath, and got dropped off with the girls. And it was a really emotional reunion. It was just so great to be back together. So we quickly ate a bite to eat, and we got going on what ended up being probably the hardest physical day of the trip. Moving our way up Trout Creek, which was supposed to be a creek, but because of this ridiculous storm, it had turned into a river, and we couldn't find a place to cross. So there was a lot of passing bikes up cliffs and down really steep embankments, and kind of moving our way over really deep, marshy moss. I think we ended up covering 5 kilometers in 6 hours that morning. But eventually we found road. We found some road again, and we got riding, and we had a good ride for the rest of the day, set up camp. At this point, we're about 45 kilometers behind our schedule. And the next day, I believe, was when we began just a beautiful, and again, worked our way through a couple of valley systems, and then began this climb up to what's called the Plains of Abraham. And we climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed, and a lot of it was a little bit too steep to ride. So we pushed a lot, rode a little bit, eventually gained the top of this crazy plain, and it was like a moonscape. It was just big, cobbly rock for as long as you could see. And you could, from there, look back and see where we'd come from that morning. that was absolutely wild. So we got to the top and started this really wild descent that was kind of technical cobbly riding. We'd already covered probably 40K that day, and we then decided we'd just keep going. We weren't going to stop until we absolutely had to. We weren't going to stop. So we have 2 hours sleep, and in the morning we get up, quick breakfast, we find the trail, and we're on it, and we push hard for like 2.5 hours. All of a sudden, like, the road just fills in with trees. Like, all of a sudden, there was just no wiggle room. There was no room at all. Nobody followed me in. I was like, come on, guys. But then when I realized what I'd got myself into, I had probably a really big hissy fit. We turned around and we all cried all the way down. And then when we got to the bottom of what we just spent like 2.5 hours climbing, we had to make some decisions. And by this point, we'd lost again too much ground to make up what we needed to. We still had 80 hard kilometers left. We came to the decision that we weren't going to be able to complete the trip. We were all pretty devastated, feeling like things were going to be incomplete, feeling like we hadn't quite made our goal. But the universe works in very weird ways, and as we were heading down to the river, struggling, this helicopter started circling. 4 guys get out, and it turns out that these guys were not search and rescue, fortunately. They were members of the reclamation team, so the team doing all of the reclamation work for the Canol Trail. And they stopped, and Roger, this guy had been on the project, he was a Sahtu Nation gentleman, and he had been part of the project since the beginning, and he looked at us and said, girls, you've done it. What's left from here, you can't even ride. You've done it. What you've done is significant. And that, I think, put all of our hearts at ease, and we all felt really complete with that. Got a ride back to Norman Wells, and then they came back for our bikes in a separate load, and we just sat in a pile of all of our stuff and had Pilsners in the parking lot and reflected on sort of favorite moments and what we've just gone through. 5 women, we all had different goals and different sort of reasons for doing the trip, but I think we all took a lot of the same away from it. And I think a lot of that is just an appreciation for the remoteness of this land and for the fact that just a handful of people have ever spent any time there, and we feel super honored for having had the opportunity to spend time there in such a self-propelled way and to see firsthand remnants of this colossal undertaking from so many years ago. It was so wild, like mountainsides washing out. I wonder, like, they must have had to rebuild 50% of it after the first season with the activity of those mountains. Like, that terrain is so dynamic. It's constantly changing. It's not something that can be controlled or harnessed in any way. It does what it wants, and bikes may not have been the best medium for exploring it, but they sure were fun.